I'm Doug, your tech support representative for Atlantic British, and in this video we're going to touch base on another very common repair, mostly on the Discovery 2s, Discovery 1, P38s, any of the 4046 engines, is power steering pump. You'll find that over a period of time there's several reasons why these pumps can fail. You may develop a bad power steering leak, which is a wear out of the seal. Could be a bearing failure or an actual internal failure of the impeller or the drive unit internally. Alright, so this is the pump that's going to be used on your vehicle. And essentially what you have here is most of your hydraulic system, which is your pump. This is the gravity feed line that would run from the reservoir down to the pump, from the pump to the cooler, from the cooler to the power steering box, and then from the box back up to the reservoir. Now what happens is these can fail internally. You can have a leaky seal, or you can have a bearing failure. If it's an internal or a bearing failure, I would generally recommend not only do you replace the hoses, you're going to take a good look at them when you take the system apart, but inside the reservoir, and I don't know how well you're going to see it on the video, but straight down inside you actually have a filter built into these reservoirs. If you have a pump failure or a hose failure, and these hoses can wear internally, they're just simply rubber hose, that material will build up on that filter, and that's basically there to keep those contaminants from going through the system. Eventually that filter can get plugged up to the point where you won't get sufficient flow from the reservoir down to the pump, which can create a whining or an erratic steering. So if you've got 100,000 miles on it and you're replacing the pump due to a failure, or you've had a hose collapse internally, you want to get that reservoir as well. Make sure that you got a good clean filter in there, and that'll help the system operate. And also importantly is the fluid that's used in the system. This is fluid supplied and made by Land Rover. It's called Active Corner Enhancement Power Steering Fluid, or short ACE fluid. And what will happen is if you use a regular power steering fluid or Dexron 3 in these pumps, over a period of time it will cause internal damage. They're not made to be used with that fluid. This is a fluid that's specially formulated for this system and can make a world of difference of how long it lasts you after you do a replacement. So what we're going to do now is we're going to show you how to access and replace the pump, how to access the hoses, and then also some visual inspections to give you an idea if you should be replacing other components as well. Alright, so let's begin by showing you how to access that power steering pump. We're going to remove the shroud, the fan, the belt obviously, and we're also going to need to remove the intake tube to give you better access. For the shroud, you have 4 Phillips head screws that lock it down to the lower half. You only need to back them off 1 or 2 turns. You'll feel them spin loosely. You don't need to remove them out of the shroud. Simply bend your hose back, give a little wiggle, loosen everything up, and we're going to place that right over to the side. Next will be the fan. And we use the 36mm fan wrench, which we actually have available in our catalog. This is a right-hand thread, and you're simply going to drop that wrench down over the nut. Now, most cases, I prefer to use a rubber mallet. You can tap that up in line. This one took a light hit. You may need to strike it a little bit more, but when you do, you want to make sure that that fan wrench isn't laying right up against one of the blades. You don't want to do any damage to the fan. Place your hand between the radiator and the fan so that when the fan drops off, you're not going to knock a hole in the radiator, which would not be a good thing. You'll feel it when it reaches the end of its threads. Then hold it in place, hose back, and we'll take that and we'll put that in a spot where it's not going to get damaged. So now we're at the point where we want to take the belt off, but before we do, now's the best time to loosen up those 3 bolts that hold the pump pulley on. You've got the belt to assist you in holding that, and there's only 3. Take a 10mm socket and a ratchet. I'm just going to break those loose. belt will come off with a 15mm socket and long. I use a 1/2" drive ratchet to give me enough leverage, because this tensioner actually does give you quite a bit of resistance. Simply push down to relieve pressure, slip the belt off the bottom pulley, and release the tensioner. Take note, before you take the belt off, look at the routing and how this belt is supplied. So take note of the routing of your belt. If you're not sure you're going to remember, you can always take a picture. With the smartphones and cameras now these days, you can just take a quick digital picture of your belt routing, and this way it'll help you out when you go to put everything back together. So we're just going to slide the belt off and take that right out of the way at this point. And you give a quick inspection. If you see any cracking, dry rot, splitting, any sign of abrasive wear, you want to replace that belt. Now is a really good time to do it. We'll set that aside. Okay, now we can take the 3 bolts out of the pulley. Okay, just that easy. We'll set that to the side. Now we're going to remove the intake tube. This is going to give you better access to this area. Now you have the mass airflow sensor here. This is going to come off with the tube. Take this upper tab, move that back so you can take the harness out of that holder. Squeeze these 2 top tabs, and then just with a little gentle push, we're going to disconnect that. Put that off to the side and get that out. These snap clips, this is your idle air control motor right here. To remove these clamps, there's a small slot right at the very end of the clamp. You can put the edge of your screwdriver in there and lift. You'll hear it pop. We have that off. And loosen our intake clamp, and then we can actually take the cover right off the air filter housing with this clamp and this clamp. Slide the hoses out, lift straight up. The upper cover will disconnect. And take it off all in one assembly. Now you can see you've got nice easy access to this area. So the next thing we need to do is we're going to actually take this AC compressor off. We're going to leave it connected. We don't need to disconnect these lines. And we can move it and push it up out of the way so that we've got access to the lower bracket. And that will consist of 4 10mm head bolts. And normally with these, once you crack them loose, they will come out reasonably easy. And I find for this one back one, because of the cables are in the way, we're going to use a box wrench on that, or a ratcheting wrench to take that off. And then also don't forget to disconnect your electrical connection, which is simply squeeze this top tab. You'll hear it click. There we go. So now we got our electrical out of the way, and we're going to grab a box wrench to take that back nut off. Alright, so we have our 4 bolts all backed off. We're going to take the 3 easy access, we're going to remove those, place those to the side. This one we can leave right in place. Alright, so you're going to need a pry bar probably to pop this AC compressor loose. Get down underneath, give it a pop. As I said, we don't need to disconnect the lines. We can leave this bolt right in place. And slide that right up and out of the way. Now, at this point, we have our mounting bracket for our power steering pump. We're going to take this pulley off. There's a 10mm head bolt here. We've got a 10mm head bolt here, which is for the bracket that supports the transmission coil lines. And then just below that, you'll see your pressure line from the pump to the cooler. And then these are the 2 hoses that we described earlier, both of your gravity feed hose, which runs down to the pump, and then after circulating through the system is pushed back up from the steering box back up into the reservoir. So we'll take a 13mm socket, put it on the 1/2 inch. take the pulley off, and what that'll do is then that gives us access to two of the bolts in the back that hold that support bracket. What's nice about taking the air filter box off, you have a little spot here to put some of your smaller parts, so you'll have easy access when you go to put it back together. And we'll take our 10mm, take our top bolt out. And we'll disconnect our support bracket. You can see that removes that right from there. Now, we're almost ready to take the whole assembly out. We're going to disconnect the hoses from the pump. Now, obviously, when you do that, fluid is going to run down and you're going to be making a mess underneath the vehicle. You want to get a catch pan. I found that I like to take the return hose off with the pump. So we're going to disconnect the return hose at the reservoir and then get some rags underneath here, so when I pull this, what's in the reservoir will end up on the rags. What you could also do, if you have access to a suction gun, you might want to draw the fluid out of the reservoir before we start disconnecting. Again, that'll minimize the mess that you make. Alright, so at this point now we've moved the AC compressor. We're going to disconnect the two hoses that go to the pump. Now the return hose, the gravity feed hose, is very difficult to get at if you want to try to disconnect it from the pump side. So what I do is usually recommend we're going to remove it from the reservoir side where we have the snap clip similar to what we had on the AC or the idle air control, and work the hose back and forth a little bit. Alright, so take our hose off there. Again, we're going to lose some more fluid. We've put a catch pan underneath to catch the overflow. And then with a 5/8 wrench, we'll disconnect the pressure line. Okay, so we have our return line from our reservoir to the pump disconnected at the reservoir side. And we've disconnected our high pressure line that runs from the pump to the cooler, disconnected below here. When you remove that high pressure line, you'll notice that there's an O-ring on the end of the line right here, and you want to give that a good inspection. Look for any splits, cracks, any distortion. If it shows any real sign of wear, you should replace that O-ring before we put it back together. Now that hose, the high pressure hose that I'm showing you that comes off the pump, is actually part of that larger hose assembly in the kit we have available. And what that does is gives you the complete assembly, which is your pressure line, your cooler, which runs across the front of the radiator, and the return line, which runs back to the pump, back to the steering box. Now you'll see it's in an area that you can get some corrosion buildup and whatnot, and if it's just surface corrosion, you'll probably be okay. But if you see really heavy scaling, or if you actually see an oily surface on the hose in this area, right, especially here where this weatherhead fitting is, then you're probably going to want to replace that as well. Now's a good time to do it. Your power steering system is broken down. You're going to have to fill it up and bleed it anyway, so now's a good time. Now to do so though, it requires loosening up the radiator, moving the radiator forward to be able to slide the cooler down in place, which is a much more involved job, which we can possibly touch base later on in either another video, or you can get the instructions online. So for now we're going to continue just to show you replacement of the pump. So we have our 13mm, we have one retainer nut and 3 bolts, and they all hold this large bracket which supports the power steering pump, and it'll all need to come off as one assembly so that we can disconnect the pump from the bracket which bolts on the back side. Alright, as you can see, there's still some fluid in there. We've poured off most of the excess. And before you set it on your bench, we'll just tuck a rag underneath there just to catch the little bit that's left in there. Okay, so now we remove the bracket with our power steering pump. We put it on the bench. This will make access to this lower hose so much easier. And this again has the same pop clip that you've seen on the idle air control motor and at the top end of this. And you'll see we've held on to the clamp. And what we're going to do is we're going to pop that off. And again, I think we're going to lose a little bit of fluid out of there, so let's put a rag underneath and catch that. Yep. So, this is your return hose. And now we've got 2 bolts that we're going to remove so that we can slide the pump out of there. Now in this bracket there are 2 sliding collars that as you install the bolts, the collar is pulled in and basically squeezes against the pump to hold it in place. So being both of those collars are tight up against the pump is going to be pretty snug inside this bracket. So we're going to need to pry it out of there. And there we go. Now see, these are the collars I was talking about. There's one there, and there actually is one there from that top stud that's mounted in the head. That'll be sliding through when we go to put the bracket back on. So what we're going to do is we'll get a small ball peen hammer, and we'll have to take a long punch through the back one. And what we're going to do is we're going to knock those back out a little bit. It'll make it easier for our reassembly, and then once we tighten it down, everything will be nice and snug. Now being this video is for demonstration purposes only, and actually this is still a good pump, we're going to actually reinstall the old pump back in the vehicle. So we're just going to give a quick wipe down. Now's a good opportunity to clean things up. Okay, remember we have our 3 bolts. There we go. Flip that over. Wiggle that around till that drops in. And we'll run our 2 bolts back in. Now at this point we can just snug them in, and when we get the bracket back in place, then we can put the ratchet back on them and apply a little more force just to make sure they're good and snug. Don't forget, we're going to reinstall our return line. Now the curve of this will be perpendicular to the bottom of the pump, just so you get approximately the right positioning. We're just going to pop that on. Easier to clamp from the back. So set our location, put clamp in place. And to reattach these clamps, we just grab the 2. We have a high spot here, and we have our high spot here. I'm just going to grab on both sides, squeeze until you hear that distinct click, and you're in place. So our pump's back on our bracket, our hose is back in place, and we're going to go lay this back in the vehicle. Now always keep in mind you're working around the radiator, so you want to always keep a hand in front, or just be very careful about how you lay things in. You don't want to be knocking a hole in the radiator. Return hose routed underneath the two transmission lines and then under the high pressure line. And the stud on the head is going to go through the top bolt hole on the pump. Slide our bracket out of the way. Let's start our 3 bolts. And they thread in relatively easy. And we'll also start our one 10mm bolt up top. And lock washer and nut on the top center bolt for the pump. And we're just going to snug in those bolts. Okay, so we've tightened our 3 bolts, our 1 nut, and our 10mm up top so that the bracket is now back in place. So next what you're going to do is going to put your pressure line back on. Again, we've checked the O-ring. And I want to just give it a quick wipe, make sure we have no dirt or any buildup on the end there. You'll actually feel this insert right in the opening. Run the nut forward. You may need to just wiggle it around a little bit just to get the nut to start so you'll feel it. Okay. And then we'll just tighten up with a wrench. Now if you're running that nut in and it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. So back it out and try again. Give it a look in the eye. Give it a good look. Make sure you're straight in, not off at an angle in any way. This way you know you're in good and square. You have a good seal and you haven't damaged any threads. So now we're just going to put our bracket back on. It supports our transmission coil lines. And we'll run that in. Reconnect our return line, then get our clamp. And again, we're just going to grab the flats and squeeze till we hear a click. And we're on. Now again, we've double checked our filter down inside of our reservoir. It looks pretty clean. So we're okay as far as contaminants, so we don't need to replace this reservoir. Again, if you see a lot of black buildup, you want to replace that and make sure you got a clean filter. So now we're going to put the pulley back on. Just in case you're not sure when you go to put the pulley back on what direction it goes on, you'll see your triangular imprint of your pump and then just the circular imprints of your bolts. So then that means it goes on in this direction. All right. Put our pulley back on. 13mm socket on our 1/2 inch. Again, doesn't really need to be super tight. Don't put all your weight on it. Just a good snug in place. Maybe once the bolt, you feel the bolt set, for no much more than 1/8 of a turn to be enough to tighten it down. Alright, now we're going to get the AC compressor back in place. We're going to lift. You have this one bolt here you're going to hold up a little bit on, so you can sneak in underneath. Wiggle a little bit and you'll feel it set on its locating dowels. And then we'll drop in our other 3 bolts. Let's get them started. Don't forget to plug your AC compressor back in. Just set your connector on top and then just squeeze down until you hear it click. Now you know you're in. Your mass airflow sensor wire, we're going to move back up top so that it's easy to access. So now we're going to reinstall our intake tube and air filter cover. Again, holding it upright, and you've got 2 hooks on here that'll grab up underneath these brackets on the bottom of the box. Be very careful with this coolant line that runs off the top of the radiator. Now this one is relatively new, so I can give it a squeeze and a push, but as they get older they get very brittle and they can snap here when you're trying to put this on. So again, go with a little caution. Put your 2 clamps on, lock the box down. Hose in there, hose in there. Then you have a snap clip on the back. I'm just going to squeeze that till it clicks. Tighten the clamp on our main intake. And don't forget to plug in the mass airflow sensor. You hear the click. You stick the harness back in the retainer. Squeeze that together. And that's in place. So next is the belt. Now again, if you weren't sure how it was routed, you can refer to the picture that you took or rely on your memory. But generally on these, and you just lay it in place like so, because you're going to scoop under the water pump pulley, over the top of the AC, over the top of the alternator, on the tensioner, loop around the top idler pulley, around your power steering pump, and on your lower pulley. Double check, make sure everything's lined up. Switch over to our 15mm. The easiest way is reach underneath the belt just above the oil filter, and then with hold a little bit of tension on the belt, push down, hook up over the top of that small idler. Again, double check, make sure you're in all the pulleys, you're not hanging off the top or off the side. And we're good. Now we go back to our 10mm and we're going to snug in those 3 bolts that hold the pulley in place. Alright, next is our fan. And again, keep your hand between the fan and the radiator once you go to start it in place. And actually you can kind of use your hand as a pivot point and start the threads to get the fan back on the water pump. Once it starts, you can spin that on Take our 36mm fan wrench. And then just a light tap to seat it. Set our shroud in place. Your vent line is going to line up with a slot on both sides. And just take your Phillips screwdriver and just to get them started. Okay, so shroud is back on, locked down, fan on, belt on, all your lines are back on. Now, when you go to refill the system, you drained a lot of the fluid out of there, but when you go to fill it back up, it's not going to fill up fully on the first shot. So what we're going to do is bring it right up to the top of the tank. And again, we're only going to use ACE fluid on there, and you can notice it's got sort of an amber green color to it. It has additives in it and whatnot you won't find in any regular power steering fluid. And it, like I said, it is formulated specifically for these pumps. Alright, so we'll fill that right up. And what we're going to do, start the vehicle. You only need to run it for about 15-20 seconds to get this amount of fluid down in the bottom of the system, and then from there we can probably top it off. Now, just a word of warning, anytime you do anything with power steering, when you go to start the vehicle, don't put your hand through the spokes of the steering wheel. Reach around the back of the steering wheel. If by chance there's enough air in there to create a reaction in the power steering system, that steering wheel can hit you in the arm. So we're going to reach around the back of the steering wheel when we go to start this. As you can see, it took almost half of what was in the tank. So we're going to fill back up and bring it up to the top. Just bring it up to the fill line at this point. Now we're going to start the vehicle and we'll steer full left, full right. Okay, so our level now stayed pretty much where it belongs. You'll see some bubbling in the top of the fluid because we know we definitely pushed some air through there. Now we're just going to let it sit for about 15 or 20 minutes. Let that air bleed out of the system, and then you can cap it off, and you should be ready to go. What I suggest is take it for a test drive. When you get home, shut it off, let it sit for a few minutes, and then double check your height. You may use a little bit more fluid. You may need to add just a little bit just to get it right to the full line. As of that, you've replaced your power steering pump, saved yourself a lot of money, and ready to go for another 100,000 miles. So when you're ready to change over your power steering pump or any of your hoses, just call any of our knowledgeable salesmen at 1-800-533-2210. Thanks for watching.